welcome. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Jo Hamilton. I am Chair of Community Board 2. Our board, as you probably know, is anticipating 3 major development projects in our district. That includes NYU Plan 2031, the redevelopment of St. Vincent's Hospital site, and also a potential proposed rezoning of Hudson Square. All of the projects will have to go through the city's Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, or ULUR. Community boards have a very important role in ULUR. It's one of the most important jobs of the community board. We get, after an application is filed, we get the first review, and it's also our responsibility to try to assess the impacts on our neighborhoods. This is an important opportunity for us to try to shape and manage the future of our districts. Therefore, it's really important that we fully understand what's going on, we understand the process, and that we respond as completely as we can to make sure that the community voice is heard. Since July of last year, we've known that NYU was coming to our board, and in response to that, we've hosted a series of public hearings and public meetings in order to learn as much as we can about their proposal, and also to learn as much as we can about the character of the neighborhood that they're proposing to develop in, and also to make sure that we hear the concerns of our neighbors. We've also hosted forums to learn something about the process, the ULUR process. In August it was, Brian Cook from the Borough President's Office did a ULUR 101 for us. And then in February we had the second educational forum with Dr. Bob Kulikowski from the Mayor's Office of Environmental Control talking about environmental review, which is a very important part of every major ULUR process. Tonight, we have a really unique opportunity, I think, to hear from 4 other Manhattan community boards, all of whom are either currently or have recently responded to major development projects in their neighborhoods. And these include expansion of Columbia University, the Hudson Rail Yards and the Western Rail Yards, the West Chelsea Special District, which actually allowed for the building of the Highline Park, and also, I think, an 11th Avenue rezoning, and I think there's another one coming up for the Chelsea Market. So CB4 seems to be as busy as we are. And then we also have the rezoning of 125th Street, and from CB7 we have both Fordham University and Extel Riverside Center project. I think this is the first time in a long, long time, the first time that I can remember, that we're actually doing a forum that is completely focused on the role of the community and the role of the community board. And we have got a lot to learn from these people's experience. I want to say something now just to remind you. The people and the participants here, sitting at this table, are all volunteers, just like you and I are volunteers. They have given their own time and their own energy and lots of hours and hours of hard work that probably turned into years of hard work in order to make themselves experts on their districts, experts on land use law, zoning law, experts on environmental review, and experts on the community, on their own communities. And I say this because after you hear from all of these people, you're going to understand that they have truly become experts, and you're not going to believe that they are not actually paid professionals. So that's how much respect. I would complete all of what they've done, and a little bit intimidated by what we're going to have to do, but I think this is a really good start for us. So I'm going to start with introductions. I'm going to start here with introductions. So the first person that, right here to my left, is Ethel Shepard, who is a longtime member of Community Board 7, has served as the chair of the Columbus Circle Task Force for CDs 4, 5, and 7, and as chair of CD7's Zoning Task Force, which successfully revised zoning north of 96th Street in their district, and in the last 3 years as chair of CD7's Riverside Center Task Force. Ethel is a planner who recently served for 6 years as president of the New York Metro chapter of the American Planning Association, and she has conducted many studies and worked in communities all around New York City, including our community, and she's also an adjunct professor at Columbia University. Then we're going to welcome Mel Wymore. Mel is currently serving his 2nd term as chair of Community Board 7 on the Upper West Side, and I think Mel counts as his most famous constituent, our own borough president, Scott Stringer, isn't that right? And I think also our Congressman, Jerry Nadler. He has served on CD7 for 15 years and led the board through their Riverside Center ULURP. Then we go to Stanley Gleaton, who is the chair of the Land Use Committee of Community Board 10 in Central Harlem. Their major ULURP recently was the redevelopment of 125th Street. Stanley's been on the board for 17 years and is a former chair of that board. Lee Compton is a former chair of CD4, which is just to our north, Chelsea Clinton, and has served on that board for 9 years. Was chair from 2005 to 2007, and is still currently the chair of their Chelsea Preservation and Planning Committee, and led CD4's efforts in all of those special zonings that I was just telling you about, the West Chelsea Special District, the High Line, for the High Line, Hudson Yards, Western Rail Yards, 11th Avenue, and is currently working on Chelsea Market. Pat Jones is a former chair of Community Board 9, which represents West Harlem, and I think was chair from 2008 through 2010. She's been on that board since 2001, and she led their efforts for the Columbia University expansion. And finally, I'm just going to welcome Brian Cook, who needs no introduction to this audience. He conducted our ULURP 101 lesson in August, and is the friendly face that we all count on for all things zoning and all things development and all things land use in Manhattan. Brian has been with the Borough President's Office for 7 years, and in that capacity has actually worked through the years with everybody sitting on this panel. So it's a really great interaction for us with the Borough President's Office on this land use stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight. And he is currently the Director of Land Use for Borough President Scott Stringer. So each of the panelists is going to just give you like a little thing for the meeting. Each of the panelists is going to speak for 5 minutes or so, give a presentation, and then we're going to be taking questions from the audience. So Terry Cood and David Gruber have got cards for you to write your questions down on and send them forward, and we'll try to make sure that they all get answered. Just a little bit of bookkeeping here. The bathroom is in the door to the back, to turn to the right, just in case, because people are always wandering around. And let's see, we want to get started, but before I do, let me just quickly introduce, we've got a number of people here. We've got Colin Casey here from Senator Tom Duane's office. Hi, Colin. Lisa Parson from Assemblymember Deborah Glick's office. And we've got Katie Smith from Congressman Jerry Nadler's office. And from the Borough President's office, besides Brian, we have Sandy Myers, Lynn Zing, and Jessica Silver. So thank you all for coming and for being here. And we're going to go ahead and get started. And I guess we're going to start with Pat Jones, Columbia University. Let's hear. And thanks.
And what better place to start than the Columbia expansion? Just also, by frame of reference, I co-chaired CD9's 197A Planning Committee, and also co-chaired CD9's Manhattanville Rezoning Task Force. Just to put it in a little bit of context, I'm not sure if other community boards were similar to this one. Oh, okay, sorry. Can everybody? After about 20 years, CB9 completed its 197, submitted it to city planning and quite a bit of dialogue. It passed the threshold review, which merely meant it was completed in all material respects. They didn't necessarily agree because that was not the review process that was undertaken to get to the threshold. And that happened in mid to late 2005. Unbeknownst to us, there's a section of the 197A rule of the city charter that says when there are two competing plans with significant differences, they should be afforded equal consideration. So our 197A plan, as I said, passed the threshold in mid to late 2005, sat on a shelf until Columbia's 197C was finished. We did take that opportunity to have a number of public meetings, meet with Columbia, and get as much information as we could about their then not published 197C application. The words we were given, or the parting words from Amanda Burton at the time was, we'd like UCB9 to sit down with Columbia, review your respective plans and exist, and identify the differences, and in good faith, see if you can resolve them. I still have that list, that grid of about 8 pages of differences. The differences stand right now the way they were in 2005, 2006. Neither party really conceded. But we continued, and I think we had many meetings. Columbia hosted some, community board hosted some. In 2007, Columbia's 197C application, rezoning application, was ready for prime time. So both plans hit the public review process at the same time. What I have here is just a handout just to put Community Board 9 and what we're talking about into context. So this first page here is just a map of Community Board 9, northern boundaries 155th Street, southern boundaries 110th Street. And the map cuts off a little. As you see, the bottom left, the Columbia Manhattanville rezoning, that's what we're talking about when we talk about Columbia. It's 34 acres. Okay. It's 34 acres, of which Columbia plans to develop 17 acres. That area, that entire area was zoned manufacturing. And Columbia's proposal was to rezone it, obviously, such that they could develop an academic mixed-use development that embodied mixed community facilities, commercial, manufacturing, and residential uses. Now, pretty much, we are a residentially zoned district. So pretty much all of the area surrounding this Columbia rezoning is either R8 or R7. So if you turn to the next page, this is just sort of a blow-up of that rezoning section. And I don't know how much detail you want, but essentially, everything that was an M zone, whether it was M11, M23, M13, whatever, in the center of it, MMU stands for mixed something, but I like to call it Manhattanville Mixed Use District. That is where Columbia will develop. That's the 17 acres. The surround, which they call other areas, essentially, to make a long story short, conforms to some of the surroundings. So the density associated with C62 essentially gives you comparable density to the R zoning that's abutting it. So that's just to clarify. So we're not talking about the 35 acres per se of Columbia's expansion. We're talking about the specific 17 acres. They've indicated that they have no intention of acquiring the properties that were rezoned, that they currently don't own, and about 8 acres are underwater, so it's not like doing anything with that. So, I don't know how long you want me to talk about. Okay. As I said, we met with Columbia for several months, created a beautiful grid, and neither the community board nor Columbia would move in terms of their decision. Now, there's also, to throw something else in, we've got the 197A plan coming forward, we've got the 197C plan that needs city approval. Another action to implement Columbia's plan was a state action. A general project plan was required and needed to be approved by the state through the Empire State Development Corporation, the ESDC. What you probably hear most about ESDC's role is ESDC has the power of eminent domain. So one of the aspects of Columbia's plan was to get ESDC to approve its general project plan. Not only was it an enabler for the use of eminent domain for privately held properties, that Columbia could not otherwise acquire them, but also their plan could potentially include development of a city-owned site where we have an MTA bus depot. They are looking to build a bathtub, which is an equivalent of 70 to 80 feet below ground. So most of the noise, not all of the noise, but most of the noise around Columbia's plan was the displacement, direct displacement of residential and business owners to unanswered questions around, is it really feasible for them to go 80 feet underground? If you're familiar with 125th Street and Broadway, the underground number 1 train goes overground. It becomes an L train. And between 137, it's above ground at 125th, then it goes below ground. And even sitting through all of the hearings and even the city planning testimonies, it was clear that they had no engineer's report that said this was feasible. It was just take it on faith. We've got someone who says we think it would work. Now keep in mind that the concept of the bathtub drove Columbia's premise that they had to have all of the property. Columbia's is not an infill strategy. It was an all or nothing. They want it, and they are, the GPP and the rezoning have been approved. So they are in line to acquire all of the property at some point. We're talking about a 2-phase project with a 20 to 25-year build. We're talking about significant disruption. They've taken the last meaningful manufacturing zone that we've got, an area that was in the process of enlightening itself. So that's really the atmosphere that we were dealing with in CD9. One of the questions Joe asked was, so what was the response to their plan? Well, for some of our constituents, you just mentioned Columbia, and it's an outright war. The community board's position was, we are not opposed to Columbia's expansion per se. It's not necessarily the what, it's the how. And I'll say it's just sort of the arrogance of Columbia University. Essentially meetings with Lee Bollinger. He just thought this was the best thing since sliced bread, and why weren't we happy? Now, another thing that was happening at the same time, the city, I believe, was instrumental in persuading Columbia that a community benefits agreement could be a good thing. And we entered into, not through the community board, but a separately incorporated local development. Question as to whether or not, since the community board was expressing a view through a vote, should they be negotiating benefits, essentially non-ULURP.
So, Pat, I think community benefits, maybe that's something that should come up and let's kind of like get a feeling about the other projects and some sense of the other projects, and then that's something to talk about.
I'll just share this. We recognized that we clearly needed significant technical expertise. The last leg of the 197A plan, we collaborated with the Pratt Center. And then when we realized that Columbia's 197C was on the horizon, we entered into a memorandum of understanding with them. What would their responsibilities be? They were essentially our technical partners. to carry us through the review of the Columbia rezoning. We went to our council member, Robert Jackson, and got $150,000 to pay them for their services, because we clearly couldn't afford them. They put together an excellent team. And needless to say, Columbia's 197C plan rolled through city council with minor modifications. The 197A plan, essentially the part of the plan that recommended what to do with that mixed use area that Columbia was vying for, essentially got removed from the 197A plan. That got adopted by city council also.
Okay. Lee Compton, thanks.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Anyone who's lived through this knows how true that is. Every rezoning is different, and rather than take Pat's advice or Joe's advice and talk about a specific thing, I would like to talk about process, because what we have learned with any luck, you can benefit from over time. I'd like to say a couple things before I get to that, though, and that is that Community Board 4 has, not yet, Community Board 4 has two land use committees, one in Chelsea and one in the north, which is Clinton. I did not lead all of those wonderful things. I participated in all of them, but we have many other fine planners on our board as well, and 11 etc. There are essentially three different kinds of rezonings. This is the generality. One is the community-based, which is the 197A. We rezoned Chelsea with the 197A, I believe, in 1999. There is a second kind which comes from city planning, which says we want to redo this. And this was Hudson Yards, the rail yards, West Chelsea, 11th Avenue. We, the community board, are a co-applicant along with the city on the 11th Avenue, and we were as well on some of the follow-up corrective actions on West Chelsea. And then the third kind, which sounds more like what you were facing, is where a developer comes to you and makes a proposal and says, this is what we would like to do, and you have to respond to that. Now, the community board's formal participation is contained in that 60-day red box. Once the project is certified by city planning, the community board has 60 days plus a few days for mailing to respond, and that's your formal responsibility. However, as it says, it doesn't start there and it doesn't end there. Most of the projects, the major projects that we have been involved in, have gone on literally for years. The Chelsea Market project that is coming is just beginning to come to a head now. We've been working on for 2 years. So I'm going to focus on the pre-certification, which is just what leads up to the fact that city planning says, okay, this is a project, we can go ahead. And afterwards, once the board votes out the resolution, what do? Sandy, please. There are essentially three constituencies involved in a ULURP. You have the developer, you have the community, and you have the city. Don't forget the city. The city has stakes in all these things. The job of the community board is to figure out what's important to each of these constituencies. And the only way you do that is you talk a lot and you listen even more. And you spend an awful lot of time. Each has their own needs. You identify those needs, and then you use those to figure out the best set of compromises, the best outcome you can get for your community. The developer. You meet privately, you meet them in the committee, you meet them any way you can. Now, meeting privately is controversial because the community board is subject to sunshine laws and etc. We have found, though, that it is absolutely crucial to meet as early as possible with the developer before their plans have solidified. And the reason for that is, if you can say, this is going to cause a problem with the community, can you think it? You might want to rethink it. We have had a reasonable amount of success getting them to change that. Then, once they've made the tour of all the electeds' offices in private, we encourage them to come and present informally at first before our land use committee, and then eventually, once it's certified, they go on and present more publicly. But again, you want to focus on, you want to tell them what are the concerns of the community. Is it a height issue? Is it a bulk issue? Because once they have finished their plan, or they think they have, it's a lot harder to get any kind of meaningful change. The community. Your community is a broad range of constituencies. You have residents, you have businesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You need to educate the community about the project and about the process. If you don't educate the community about the process, you'll double your work. Make sure everyone knows, exactly like this, how things work, what is possible, what is not possible. Listen to the community. What are they concerned about? What are their ideas? We've had good things come out of community meetings. Identify constituencies. Is there a small retail pocket, like the photo district or something like that has special needs? Find it, talk to them, get them involved. And then the last, if necessary, create community coalitions. We have done this in 3 cases now. The community board meets. We put members, the representatives from each of the elected offices. We put neighborhood groups. We put community, block associations together. And we've had one, we call them community advisory committees. We've had one for Javits, we had one for the Hudson Yards, and we have one that is still operating. The Hudson Yards is still operating. And we have one for the Moynihan Station. Now, 2 of those, the Javits and the Moynihan Station, are state projects and subject to completely different rules. It makes it even harder. But we have found, we have consistently insisted to the state, put it through UR. They don't like it, but at least we say that. And all of our electeds had supported us on that. Finally, the city. City planning is not your enemy. City planning is, in fact, the most valuable ally you're going to have in this, because they know zoning, they know how it works. This is the extension of the mayor's office. They are there to make things work. Meet with them. They are a crucial resource. Talk to them. Ask them questions, how things work. Ask them for ideas, how to solve problems. Because city planning is not just talking to you, they're talking to the developer 2 and 3 times as much as they are to you. So you've got to get in there as well. Don't neglect city planning. Talk to them early and often. Have your city planning representative come to your committee meetings. Ours do routinely. You want them to know what you're thinking about and what your concerns are. Meet early and often with the representatives of each of your elected officials. I've listed all of the ones for the state here. If you are fortunate enough, as we are, to have a nosy and curious congressman's rep, include them as well too, but now it's up to you. Sometimes it works. You want all of them to know what is happening, what your concerns are, because they're going to be your valued resources later on. Not just the borough president's office, which is obvious because they have a direct role, but the other electeds will help as well. Finally, are there other agencies that are involved? We had a development called Two Trees up in the 40s on 11th Avenue, and we ended up citing the NYPD horse stable in that building. The city is trying to renege on that, but we're going to not let them get away with that. Pay attention. What's your issue? Is it historic resources? Then landmarks preservation is important to you. There are other agencies. And here is where your representatives can help get the attention of these agencies for you. That's why they need to know what you're doing. issues that are important to you. And this is completely different for every project. It can be zoning. Is it a C zone versus an R zone? When we have the West Chelsea Special District, we wanted an R zone. Instead, everything was done as a C, C62, C63, C64. It has unintended consequences because you can have public parking garages in C zones and you can't in R zones. It has been a mess. You can also have clubs, which is a separate mess. What's important? Building form, height, bulk, street walls, context. What's important to you there? What's the program of the building? Affordable housing is one of our big issues. What are the income bands? We pioneered a set of 3 different bands for affordable housing, so it doesn't all go to the lowest of the low-income people. Another thing that we fought long and hard for was the distribution of the affordable housing units should be on all floors of the building, not tucked away in a corner down below. What's important to you? What's important to the community? Find out and keep pushing it. If you have to concede a point, if there's something the developer won't give up, ask for compensation. Ask for the siting of a public facility of some type. Ask for a park. Find something that they can give. Most developers are going to make a lot of money on this, and they can darn well give something back to the community. Ask for it, and don't be embarrassed to. Finally, if you lose a point, and you can't get compensation, and it's still crucial to you or the community, make a note. Don't forget about it. Put it on your follow-up list. Now, there are 3 general kinds of actions by the community board. I'm going to focus on the first and the third. I'd like to say, though, that your resolution should be a complete, self-contained story. It should describe the project, it should describe the impact, it should describe in detail your reasoning for why it's wrong, what changes it needs. Our responses typically range, with appendices, from 25 to 150 pages long. There's a lot of work that goes into these. And that's your formal product, and that's your starting point. Anyone who reads that resolution should have a complete, thorough understanding of the issues as they are perceived by the community. And don't be deceived. City planning commissioners do read these. And they certainly read ours. If you create a good product, they will read it. Okay, environmental review.
I mean, we just kind of like speed up just a little bit.
I will. I'm going to, in that, I will jump here to scope of work for EIS, because that's something that Pat specifically talked about. It is crucial and it is often underappreciated its importance. When you get to the end of this whole process and you're before your city council and you're asking for changes, the question is going to come up, is it in scope what you're proposing? And what that means is, if it was not considered in the EIS, it cannot be considered at the end, no matter how valuable it is. What that means is, when you are creating the scoping document for the EIS, your job is to sit down and think of all possible outcomes and get everything in there, all these alternatives at the end here. You're not going to get them all. We've never gotten to the end and not found something that we wish we had been there. But be as comprehensive as possible. And the last meaningful slide is, once you write your resolution, it goes to the borough president's office. Nothing in your resolution should be a surprise to the borough president, because you've been talking to them all along. The important thing here is you want the borough president's response and the board's response to be congruent. They want to agree, they can have different language, but they have to agree on the same basic points, or they should, unless you decide to disagree on something. Because city planning will ask, is the community board on the same page as the borough president? When you get to the city planning commission, Go to the review session. Our 11th Avenue session was Monday, 2 days ago. Listen, because the commissioners are going to ask questions. Public hearing, which was this morning for 11th Avenue. Bring out the community. Make sure you have board members testify, people who know your resolution. And then finally, once the City Planning Commission votes it out, there is lots of room for restricted declarations, points of agreements, where you can modify what is going towards the City Council. And this is something that we agree completely with what Pat said. Keep track of your asks, your wins, and your losses. And what I'm going to show you very quickly is the Excel spreadsheet that we created to keep track of the open points at the end of our Western Rail Yard. Let me just go through quickly.
So I guess you guys all get the idea, we have a lot of work ahead of us. Stanley.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Stanley Lee, and I am Chair of Land Use Community Board 10. Joe, I'd like to thank you for the board for having us this evening. And also for asking to speak with me, and Pat, thank you so very much. Community Board 10 is Central Harlem. Central Harlem is from 110 to 155th Street in the middle of Harlem, Central Harlem, which is St. Nicholas over to Fifth Avenue, the west side of Fifth Avenue. Joe had mentioned the rezoning of 125th Street. I know Pat was also involved in that, as well as Community Board 11. I suppose when they first started out, we called it River to River. But then as we continued to talk and discuss it, we found that it didn't go from River to River. We went to Second Avenue. But that was just, but again, I think we had mentioned about reading it, and as we continue to go on, things do change. One of the main issues that we had with the rezoning is that, and not to offend anyone here, that we did not want 125th Street to look like 86th Street. and when I say that, I'm not because 86th Street is because that's the way it is. No, and I'm not saying that we have.
CBA's not here. Let's plan on these days.
And when I say that, please, and I didn't mean to offend you, but Harlem has its own character. When people talk about going to Harlem, they talk about going to the small store, they going to Sylvia's, going to the boutiques, and tasting what Harlem has to offer. The proposed rezoning, there would be skyscrapers basically on 120 feet. It would be housing on 120 feet. What we were trying to do is keep it like it was to maintain our architectural integrity. Keep the buildings like they were, just like in Europe. One of the things we talked about, like in Europe, when you go to Europe, they don't tear buildings down, they renovate from inside, correct? So that's what we want to do. We want to keep the character of Harlem. So it'll look different because each community has its own character, and that's really what I'm saying. I hope, and I didn't mean to offend you. I really did. All right, but so that was one of our main issues. Just so happens that, and you talked about city planning. The plan that city planning had was really basically came from this. Number one, 125th Street has not been rezoned in 40 years. So when you talk about a 40 year, then you come back. That's major. One of the things that I was sitting here thinking, when I first started, I'm 17 years on the community board. And when I first started the community board, let me even back up. Harlem itself is such a fast changing community. And I say that because when I first started the community board, and this is even embarrassed, I'm even embarrassed to say this, we were looking at a census tract, and there were 8 people who made $50,000 or more. It was on the census tract. I'm not saying, obviously, everyone had not, but 8 people, I was one of them, all right? Right now there are more, all right? There are a lot more, but because of the diversity of the people who are coming into our community. So when we talk about the role of the community and Europe actions and the change that's going on, we have to consider the people who have been there. There are people who have been in Harlem for years and years and years who have suffered through all of the mishaps and the abandoned buildings and all that that's going. you know, and nothing is being done, and all of a sudden now people are coming in, or the community is changing. So when we talk about the role of the community, we were trying to maintain the people who were there to make sure that, you know, they would be able to stay, and we would be able to provide for them, but on the same token, we would also have to be able to accommodate and make plans for people who are coming in now with higher incomes, you know, different professions than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. You know, it's very, very interesting, and I just want to digress for a minute. There was a city planning that come to us with the fresh fruit, vegetable, and meat plan amendment, and our board voted no. We voted no against it, and people said, well, why did you vote no? We voted no because part of that caveat was that builders, people who were coming into the community, you know, the builders who were coming in, developers who were coming in. So this would really only apply to new developers. You know, I live in Harlem, I eat fresh food every day. Our premise of the community board was that, why can't you look at our other at the stores that are already here and help them to upgrade their business so they can provide fresh fruits and vegetables, but that was not able to be done. You know, we didn't see giving a developer $100,000, you know, credit to come in. And so we asked store owners, they would say that, you know, it would have cost, what it was is that if stores who were already in the Harlem area had upgraded and done refrigeration, remodeling, it would have cost them so much, and all they would have gotten was a tax credit. So we voted against it because there is fresh food at home. But the role of the community is very, very important. You know, we listen to our constituents. You know, so with the 125th Street rezoning, the plan that was presented really came from the community. It came from the board. It came from also store owners. We had the bid on 125th Street. 125th Street bid was very, very important that there would have been some, gratuities that were given for building commercial spaces, but also for entertainment, you know, for restaurants, for those types. So the bid also had to be involved. We had businesses, HBA, Harlem Business Alliance, and others. So we had started this process a long time ago. When we first started, and I think that's also very, very important. When we find that the developer comes to us, what we do is also ask them to come in very early. You know, we start the process very early on, not like a month before, you know, they're going to be certified. We ask them to come in many months before, so again, we can massage it, we can look at it, we can also let them know some of the things that we feel that are not going to, which the community would not like to see, and how we would like to see it differently. We have another project that, and I like two projects that I made that I would also like to talk about. We had a modification of a 25-year-old, it wasn't a, it was urban renewal, sorry. It was an urban renewal plan that had been certified 25 years ago. This was the Innis Francis house on 124th Street at 7th Avenue, and it took up from 124th to 123rd, and all of 124th Street, most of 124th Street, had their buildings, had low rises and a high rise on the avenue. And they came to us, Avenue City Development Corp came to us because they needed a modification and wanted to change what was done 25 years ago. And that's very, very important. You know, the ULURP itself, because the 123rd Street, which had overall brownstone, had drastically changed. You know, 25 years ago, it was a predominantly African American and or Latino community, and now it's a mixed community. So the focus was entirely different. And it was a major, and you know, even the community board, because on 124th Street, we were going to have a whole block that was going to be vacant because it was going to be in 3 stages. You know, the first stage was to renovate the building on 7th Avenue. There were row houses. The row houses were going to be torn down, and they were going to be, a building was going to be built on the parking lot on 123rd. There were row houses on 124th. The row houses were going to be torn down after the building was built on 123rd for those people who moved in. But the people who own brownstones, the residents who own brownstones on 123rd Street were very, very upset because of lighting and all the issues that come up with construction and would have been major. But that was like I said, urban renewal plan 25 years ago. So, long-term thinking is very, very important when you begin to look at the works. Because if we had, who, I don't know, in hindsight, maybe we would have done the same thing. But now, for about 2 or 3 years now, we're going to have one block, a city block, that's basically three-quarters going to be vacant, and the lighting was an issue, garbage, people hanging out, so that was another issue that was. The last thing that we did was a major, major in the fact that, and I'm sure all of you have read about it, the Harlem Children's Zone, they built a school on 129th Street and 7th Avenue in a NYCHA project, NYCHA development. And this is a $100 million project, school, state-of-the-art school. NYCHA sold the land. It was bought, paid for by Harlem Children's Zone, which is a charter school, as well as $60 million that the city, the Department of Education was going to give them. Our vote was, there's a cul-de-sac there, and the only vote that the community had was whether or not the cul-de-sac would be eliminated and there would be a through street. Section 18, also these ULURPs are also very, very educational, because if you're going to build in the middle of a major project, a development in a community, you would think that the community, and I'm sure all of you have been, had this happen maybe in the community, that you would have some input. Section 18, which is the federal guidelines, says that that project only has to come to the community as you have to alert the community.
You just want to wrap up?
Yeah, I'm going to wrap up, I'm sorry. Is that much? When you get up, you can't stop, I'm sorry. But again, so we voted down the block, and I think that the feeling was because the community felt so powerless on this major development going through, that the community voted against, the board, voted against the opening of the cul-de-sac. So Section 18, federal government, we're also, in our resolution, we wrote to ask to try to change it and to have more substantial community involvement, not just hearing about it, but for the community to be able to actually have some sort of change in a project that came to us that was under the Section 18 guideline.
Thank you very much. Mel.
Thank you, Joe. I think Joe invited me to sit on this panel because I had by far the steepest learning curve coming into ULURP of anyone I know. And because I didn't sit on the land use committee, I really never participated in a ULURP committee board. Yet as chair of the committee board, I was asked to preside over one of the largest ULURPs we've done in the last decade at least. But Committee Board 7 does have a secret weapon, and that secret weapon is called Ethel Sheffer. So with Ethel Sheffer comes an army of architects and planners and all of that, so we managed pretty well. But I wanted to kind of speak to not the specific project so much, because I think you've learned here that it's almost impossible to learn about your project by looking at all the other projects that happen. Just the details of any ULURP process are so overwhelming that if you spent time learning their projects, you wouldn't have the time to learn your own. So lesson number 1 is really figure out your own project and learn as you go. So the first thing I want to remember is that ULURP is fundamentally a political process. And the reason you have ULURP is so that the community has a say in a large land use action for what that's going to happen. Now the trick of it is that you want to create a result that allows your borough president and your city council to do a political action. So what they need is a roadmap. Borough President Scott Stringer kept on saying, "Give me a roadmap, give me a roadmap." It took me about 6 months to figure out what roadmap meant. But that makes sense now. So you want to give them the results and the political support to actually fight for those results. Now, the other half of the question is that ULURP is also fundamentally a technical process with very strict rules of playing the game and very technical details of who knows how to play those rules, how to follow those rules. So it's an important thing to balance the political process and the technical process, those two things. So one thing I suggest is have a real champion who has the ability to take the input of their community, have hearings, really forge kind of a sense of core principles and priorities that are coming from the community. And also someone who can work very well with a technical team or several people with the knowledge of what is ULURP, what is architecture, what is urban planning, and so that you can balance those two things together. I also want to agree with Lee. The sooner you talk to everyone, the better. The developer, the other thing I want to say is the developers know a lot more than you do, no matter what. They have lawyers that are very, very well versed in land use law. They have architects that know better what's changeable, what's not changeable. They are gonna, and they have a lot more money. I can't believe you guys got 150,000 to your thing, but we managed to raise, I think, 15,000, maybe 25,000. And we spread it very thin. We picked and chose a couple of technical art consultants that helped us. We also had amazing volunteer consultants. Paul Wellman in the audience here as one of the people that really stepped forward and helped us understand what the project we're talking about. So just in terms of a couple of, I'm going to turn it over to Ethel in a second here, but in terms of the possible pitfalls, I see a couple of them. One is that community boards tend to follow the community and really go for an all or nothing kind of approach. In other words, we hate this project and we won't engage with you because we don't want this project in our neighborhood, and so therefore, just get out of our face. That's a mistake, because then you have no say when that project gets passed anyway, or kind of a too late of a say. And that happened to us somewhat in other projects in the Upper West Side, where we just the political gravity was about opposing the project altogether rather than working with the developer to really make meaningful changes that would help the community. That's a pitfall, and I really urge you to take the time to find meaningful alternatives, figure out what your priorities are, and have a real say, real alternatives early on in the scoping, and have a real say in what that ultimate project is going to look like. And then the second pitfall is toward the end, when you really are in the middle of negotiations, after you've had your resolution, you're at City Council, and you want to have a clarity of that process too. Make sure that you are taking very careful notes, that all agreements are made, based on the reflective of your priorities, and that are made in common with everyone signing off all of the agreements that occur in the City Council. Because there's a negotiating process at the very end that takes about 3 or 4 days, and that's where the pedal hits the metal, and you can lose or win, and sometimes you don't even know what happened to you, because they said, oh, you agreed out in the hall of this, and you didn't really have a common agreement among the many players. So set up a process for negotiation at the very end, because if you don't, months of work can go down the drains. Okay? And I think that's enough for me. How about you, Ethel?
I'll just say, that was good. I just want to say one thing before just being the cleanup hitter for the moment, and that is when Joe said at the beginning that all of us are volunteers, and as many of you are, in fact, that's true. But I just want you to know that years ago when I came onto the community board a long time ago,
She wouldn't tell me then.
I will tell you. I taught political science for a long time, And that's what I was interested in, and I got onto the community board because I got active in the community on many different social service and SRO and crime issues. The experience of the community board was one of the most educational and continues to be the most educational, I think, both in terms of learning about the community and learning about the different people and learning the issues. So much so that in my case, I'm not advocating it, but about 12, I have been teaching and so on, but about 12, 15 years ago, I kind of did a mid-course correction and started to really study planning, in part because of the community board, because I just kind of got interested in it, and believe it or not, became a professional. So that's why I'm a professional and got the license and so on, and eventually became a president of the American Planning Association. I'm not advocating that, but I sure am saying, what I am saying is that the community board can really be one of the most emotionally taxing and satisfying experiences, and in some ways intellectually, and in terms really of the civic life, which I firmly believe in, can be most wonderful. So, taking off from what Mel has said and everybody else, I just want to quickly make a few points and a little bit from what Joe gave us as questions, because I do absolutely support the getting in early and doing the homework. I want to make 3 or 4 quick points. One is, it's the community board by definition is not the technical arm. I mean, the idea of the community board, I don't have to tell you in the room, is to get a cross-section of the citizens, the residents, the people who live and work in the area. It's good to have an architect or 2 on the board. It's good sometimes even to have a developer and so on. But the whole premise of it is that you do not absolutely have to start out being a technician. That said, however, the best thing, I think you've heard it from everybody here, is that you really have to become a citizen expert. And by that, I mean that you have to know to master the process, do your homework, and then ideally, especially with these huge projects, that you really sometimes, often, have to get some other help. That I believe there's a real deficiency in the way New York's handling things and in the ULURP process, because we all know that the city charter says that all the community boards should have planners on staff and so on. Not that planners are, the be-all and end-all, but it would be a help. And we know that the budgets haven't permitted that, and that there's a certain disconnect because we are volunteers, yet that you need help because you're not the developer, you're not city planning, but you sure do need to be informed why. In order to make your political point, our political point, in the most educated way. And the more educated you are, the stronger your political advocacy point, which nobody else can make but the community. So I really think in terms of a couple of questions that Joe asked, if anything that is needed, really that I would really push borough presidents and others, but it isn't at all the borough president, is that there really needs to be a better system and mechanism by which community boards can get help. I'm glad Community Board 9 got the money. I mean, I've done it, others have done it. We've always scrounged. And the way we've done it, we've got good relations with foundations. And over time, but we've gone to them individually and so on. It's great. It's not the only way to do it. And questions, I can get to that in a minute, but I just want to make 1 or 2 other quick points, carrying through a couple of points from what Mel said, everything that everybody else said, the preparation, but also there is a time, and I think Lee and others said it, to affirm before the projects what your priorities are. That doesn't mean you're going to be rigid, but in a way we always respond. By definition, the community board has to respond, but it doesn't have to be that way in the sense of in advance, even if we're all volunteers, to articulate, wait, what are some of the priorities that are tops that are going to affect the community no matter what the project is, and how can we measure the particular application against some of our core values. That doesn't mean that we are rigid, but, you know, do we have some criteria here so that while we have to, we must listen to the interests in the community. The community board is always, I think, in a tension, a creative tension state. It's got to balance, it's got to represent the community, but in these large projects, or like the rezonings that we had to do north of 96th Street, very significant, very complicated, there were many specific interests. No, said some people in the 90s, we don't want tall buildings. On the other hand, just because we want it to be the way it was, I mean, we're a neighborhood of tall buildings as well as brownstones, but we don't want those kinds of tall buildings on our block. So the community board has to listen to the community and balance, but the difficulty is it's very hard always to respond only to the loudest voice. Because we have to weigh that, though clearly numbers and so on are interested and are important, as well as, frankly, weighing some morality, that's hard to say, and, you know, what's possible, such as those who are less privileged, and especially on the Upper West Side, which was always a mixed community, but it's a very wealthy community in many ways, and it has changed. Much of it for the better, but a number of things have changed in which we need to keep protecting and thinking about balances in Manhattan. One other very quick point, another point is that the process we all know, and we're aware of it, but it really is a bifurcated process. It's sometimes more than that. Everybody's spoken about it. We all know, and you're going to have this. You have it with St. Vincent's, they have it with NYU, and that is there are historic districts and landmarks and so on, and yet you have rezonings. But you know what? You can't, in the process, you don't handle them at the same time. First you deal with landmarks, and then you have to go to the next thing, and if landmarks approves, that already has locked in when you get to the big application. There's some real pitfalls. The last little point that I will make, because there's a lot more, but I know you want to ask questions, is what we, just what I would say what Mel said, because that was very salient for us at Riverside Center. I mean, I've been through it a few times, but let me tell you a couple of mistakes we made at the end. At the end when we were sitting day and night, till midnight in the speaker's office, and then early in the morning again in the speaker's office. We didn't always write everything down in those last negotiations. I don't know what possessed us. I think we were just, everybody, we were so tired, and also they were at us in the Excel never came into a meeting with fewer than 12 people, 5 lawyers. I mean, we can handle ourselves, but we were tired. But so we made a couple of mistakes. It wasn't irrevocable, but just the point that Mel made is not insignificant, which leads to, you think it ends with the community board 60 days. If you're really in there, you're going to keep going straight through. You're going to go to the borough president, and you're going to hit the city council as well. Really last point, and that is, guess what, you Manhattanites, us in Manhattan, the people making decisions in the city council, you guys, I mean, and to the north, you have the speaker representing. They do not, I'm sorry, they are not so impressed. I'm speaking in general, I'm making a big generalization. But when we all say, wait a minute, this is too big, the density is too much, you're taking away some of the heritage, and there are any number who will say, why aren't these projects coming to us? What's your problem, privileged Manhattan? And such a question as, guess what? Cars and parking and garages and so on, which figured in the Riverside Center, we were pressured enormously by members of the city council who were doing their job. That's the way they saw it. Why are you asking for fewer cars than what the applicant wanted? They wanted the developer to get the 1,800 cars that was asked for. This is in a residential community, you know, at the tip of the residential community, because they said, this is what the city needs. So that is both their own view from their own districts, but also, in their opinion, weighing citywide issues versus local, and sometimes a reverence for Manhattan as the economic engine, but a kind of annoyance of what are you complaining about. So those are some of the things that to be aware of in what remains, no matter what, a terrifically interesting process.
Thanks very much, Ethel. So, you know what? Thanks, Laura. I'm going to follow up a little bit. We touched on it, and Mel and Ethel also touched on it, is that, you know, just because we weigh in our sort of part of the process, there's a lot more to go. And this is why I want to now go to Brian Cook from the Borough President's Office, and let's get a perspective on, after it leaves our hands, after we think we've made, you know, the best recommendations we can make, how do we try to get our ideas to stay firm through the rest of the process? Yeah, and he's worked with everybody, and he's worked with every one of these projects, so
Actually,
give us some insight.
I would say this is sort of trippy for me, because this is like when I started with Lee.
Down memory lane,
Like Hudson Yards at my most naive.
this is your life?
So my last project at Riverside Center, I guess the nice way to put it is experience. I think jaded is, but I mean, I guess, you know, I've seen this process go through, and it's amazing. No two Yorks are alike. And that sentiment is actually very true. And no two process after the community board is exactly alike. And just to highlight a couple of examples of some of the differences. With Columbia, you know, they were very intractable about what their plans were. At the same time, in our review process, because they were very feeling the pressure from a lot of different sides, we were able to get, what, 130 million?
Ultimately, a benefits agreement valued at 150 million, plus the city gave in 150 in affordable housing.
And some of that, actually, we were able to get at the Borough President's Office, actually, I think 30 or 20 some odd $million in affordable housing alone. 24 million in affordable housing. See, look, I've been here so long, like 20, 30 million, what's the... And we were able to get significant movement forward. I'd say the same thing happened with Fordham University when they went forward. We were able to look at a lot of the things that the community had identified and looked for different ways in which we could say, you know, the community has asked us for 50 things. And we can either wait until the very end of this process when the city council has to vote for the city council member to try and get 50 things. But they've got, as you heard, maybe 5, 6, 7 days. So if we can get them to commit to 25 of those things, maybe we can actually give them our conditional approval, let them know that there are still things that they have to deal with, but take those things off the table and make it easier for the council. In other cases, like Riverside Center, the developer came in and was kind of intractable. It was everything from, it's August, I can't get any of the city to meet with me. Who's here working in August? Well, and to, well, I mean, clearly, why would you care about whether there were active uses on 59th Street? 59th Street is dead. We should leave it dead. And we'd have to come back and go, but we could activate it. Like, it costs you nothing to activate it. You can put retail and make money to activate. The board wants you to activate. I want you to activate. City planning too much to activate to go. And literally wind up in this hour-long conversation with an architect to finally go, activate it. And got nowhere. And at that point we went, all right, we have an option here. We could try and lay out and try and get more and try and argue for this last week. Or we can spend this last week putting as much effort behind the smartest no that we can come up with. Putting as many technical points in and just joining the board and trying to push that way and try and move things forward. And it probably helped because at that point I think, I should also say, at one point Exio was bringing their finance people, Carlisle groups walking in. We're really broke. We're the Carlisle group. We can't afford it. You're like, you're the Carlisle group. And so you would sit there, and so you never know how, particularly in our phase, this is gonna go, because in some cases we can, if the board and the notion of a roadmap, knowing what you want, knowing as early as option, the alternatives, the things that would make this better, even if not perfect, even if you can say, I would still hate this project, but I'd hate it 10% less if you would just give me X, or if you would change Y. And laying those out helps us. And the reason it helps us is particularly because what Ethel started to talk about at the very end, which is these 2 points. And I'm going to move over here. See, the board and the borough president, we are conditional. We're recommendations. We use what we can to leverage the project as much as that can. And from our office, we're like Ward 4, we read and we read and we read, and major projects have massive recommendations. We go through every ULURP, every assumption. I think my planners check footnotes. The developers hate us. But ultimately, the first vote is the City Planning Commission. The City Planning Commission, for those who don't know, is 7 members of the mayor, appointed by the mayor, 1 appointed by each borough president, that's 5, and 1 appointed by the public advocate, which means 6 not mayor, 7 mayor. Simple majority to approve. So, we use our knowledge in the recommendations the board puts forth. The more intelligent they are, the better. The borough presidents, the more intelligent they are, the better. Because what Mel was talking about, that technocratic part, this is a lot here. Where can I get technocratic leverage to try and move this along a little bit, to change it, to get traction? But then the problem comes in the city council. And the truth is, I love every one of Manhattan's council members. I don't know one that I actually dislike. And every one of them I've seen fight tooth and nail for the community. And I would be surprised to see a council member ever to say, I don't care about my community. The problem is,
Every never.
but the problem is ultimately at these votes, you have 1 council member out of 50. And what do you do when, in the case of Fordham, they're like, well, you have this campus on the Upper West Side, but we really like Fordham in the Bronx. And what do you do when they say, you know, a lot of the construction workers who like this project are out in my district in Queens? And what do you do when Staten Island goes, well, we're Republican, we like development, what are you talking about? I mean, what do you do when you have a group of people who may not necessarily agree with even the values of Manhattan? I mean, I've gone in front of unions to give the Land Use 101 and said, you know, in Manhattan we're pretty progressive, we do generally like good work and good wage. And they go, yeah, but it's not all you guys. And like that actually took me a moment to think about it. There are actually people out in the outer boroughs who think, well, maybe it doesn't need to be here. So the important thing to say is, the board is going to make a vote, and the smarter the recommendation, the more detailed, helps us, the more of a roadmap. Because we're going to take that recommendation and we're going to start trying to pair it up. We're going to pair it up to where we think we have political leverage. We're going to pair it up to where we have technical leverage. We're going to pair it up where our priorities are. We're going to look at where other people's priorities are, and we're going to try our best to get as much movement as we can. And if we can't, we're going to try to give as much support to the arguments that we feel we can actually give technical support to, because the first people we have to convince are very technical. And there's a public hearing, and you should show up and you should testify, because it does matter. Amanda Burden does not like to get yelled at, and she's used to getting yelled at, but she wants to make changes. She wants to be responsive. She's just doing it from her perspective, and that's from what the mayor's priorities are and what the technical people are telling her. And then when you get to the city council, I'd say you've got council members who are going to want to fight for you, but they also have to deal with the technical people saying, well, look, I realize all the council and everyone can agree, but our lawyers are telling us we don't think it's in scope, or city planners' lawyers are telling us it's not in scope, so we're going to have to just ignore it. And sometimes you have to push to say, all right, if you can't do this now, let's get a commitment to do this in the future. Memorandums of understanding, like with 125th Street, where there's a lot of agreement for affordable housing that wasn't in 125th Street, but all around Harlem. That was gotten as an agreement as follow-up, and it's actually, Ward 4, I think, is the king of this. I couldn't even list all the follow-up directed back. I lose track. But so what I'd say is, in this process, there's both the political, and then underneath that, the technical, there's negotiations going on. For us personally, the best we can have is have an active, engaged community. We come to every public hearing. your council people and their staff come to public hearings. We're listening to what the community's saying, we're looking at the board's resolution. We typically don't have a public hearing ourselves because we have 30 days. But what we do is we try and meet with the board to go through what they want, trying to work out what are the community priorities, what have we been hearing, bounce ideas up. And then we're meeting with developers and getting yelled at left and right by $800 an hour lawyers. And then it goes on to the city planning. We'll have a public hearing. And they're going to meet with the applicant. But it's also an opportunity for the board to try and meet with them as well as the emissaries for the community to push further. And then at city council, there are public hearings, there are meetings, there are negotiations, there are last-minute negotiations. There's the restrictive declaration where developers will try and slip in weird words to screw things up. So, I mean, I could almost go on for long, but I want to get to questions. So, what I'd say is nothing is the same, but the way you have to start thinking about it is not only what do you want, but where do you want it to happen? Who do you want to do it? How do you want to get the best result for your community? And I guess that's where I'm going. I'm sure I'll.
Thank you very much. I don't know about you, but I think I'm a little overwhelmed and probably a little depressed and confused and don't know exactly what to do next. But we're going to start with some questions from all of you guys. And the first one is for Mel and Lee. Here we go. If a vocal segment of the community is just saying no, we have this phenomenon on St. Vincent's and NYU. How do you go about justifying negotiating concessions with a developer? Do you plow ahead with negotiations even in the face of strong opposition? Do we risk looking like Neville Chamberlain in the end?
I think the main thing is to figure out, to really dig deep into, get specific about the why the no exists, so that you can begin to draw the underlying values from the community's perspective, and then start to bring those values into your response. So that what we did in Community Board 7 was we held many hearings, and also we had a charrette with many architects also, that kind of gave us a set of principles from the technical side, the architecture side, but on the hearing side, where all the no's were coming from the community, we had the opportunity to say, well, what's really important here? Is it density? Is it open space? Is it needing concessions for education? So taking the no and breaking it into underlying assumptions would allow us later to build our comments that were at least consistent with the neighborhood, even though it was an absolute that the neighborhood was giving us. And that's more applied to Riverside Center than Riverside South. The other thing I want to say just on this issue is, to the extent that you can, ULURP always starts with an application, meaning that the developer is proposing the project. The developer is framing the conversation in the first place. And if anything you can do to have the community frame the conversation. In other words, take the initiative away from the developer by creating your own language, your own terms, and usually we did that through what we call core principles. But it could happen in value statements or alternative plans or anything. But you really want to be controlling where your values are coming from. Because later in the ULURP, you're bound to dealing exclusively with the application itself. So you want to counterbalance that early on by framing your perspective very early if you can.
Thank you. Somebody else? Yeah, Lee, great.
I have never seen an application where everybody was either for it or everybody was against it. So it may be that the loudest group of people is, let's say, against it because it's easy to be against things. I think it's the responsibility of the community board to listen and, as Mel was saying, make sure people understand and arguing about the right things. And I'd like to say, this is my take on this. I think St. Vincent's is an excellent idea because I think the fight that's going on in St. Vincent's right now is ill-conceived. I've been asking a question since the beginning and it has not been answered. Why did St. Vincent's fail? If you don't know why St. Vincent's failed, replacing St. Vincent's with the same thing is likely to fail again. And that's, you have to get more information.
We haven't asked for.
You know what, excuse me, you know what, I'm sorry, we are here, and these panelists are our guests. And so they're going to speak. Tim, I would like for you, please be quiet, or I'd like for you.
I won't mention that.
Thank you.
We've asked for.
Thank you. Tim, I said enough. Okay? We're going to let Lee finish, and I think it's a good point, and we need to hear what he has to say.
And a final thing I'd like to say in terms of conducting a community board, when I was chair, I was known as, I am personally opposed to abstentions. It's a legal right people have, but I believe that if you're a member of the community board, you have the responsibility to educate yourself in order to take an informed position. And that's, so in the end, we all have to vote our conscience. We have to decide what we believe is achievable, what is not achievable, and do the best we can. We don't make the right decisions all the time, but I think almost all of us do the best we can.
Thank you. You know, I'm going to ask a question, and it's sort of following up on something that's here. Can one of you address scoping? You know, talked about how important scoping is. I mean, it was sort of referred to, but it's like, if we're going to end up with specific ideas about things that we do and don't want to see, if we don't get them into the document. So I don't know who wants to take that on, maybe a couple people, Brian, and then maybe also, and Ethel wants to add something, or anybody else wants to add something about the importance of scoping, because that's the first part of our process. And we often do it, you know, I just want to say one thing, is that, oh, great, the map, yay, the chart, is that scoping happens and it happens soon. It's like, once scoping happens, and there's often a long lag time between the first scoping hearing, right, and the actual certification of the ULURP. So we have time during that to kind of go through a lot of the technical things that we have to go through. But if we don't get the scoping right, I worry that, you know, we could end up in a position that something we really did want doesn't actually even end up being on the table. So I want to talk about that.
So what I'll say is there are two types of scoping that people should know about. There's what, for lack of a better word, I would call legal scope and environmental scope. So, and what do we mean by that? So this is the process of environmental review. I had it here as a slide, but I would do my sorry. So basically what ends up happening, whenever somebody wants to do discretionary action, they have to fill out an environmental assessment statement. Literally it's a form. I think I'm doing X, Y, and Z. It could result in an impact. I have to do, you know, either announce it or not announce it. There are very specific rules about it. The developer gets either a negative or a positive declaration. Negative declaration means you're not going to have any impact. Where do you think they went? They're in a positive declaration.
Well, from whom do they get?
From the Department of City Planning is the one who's responsible for overseeing and ensuring they're complying with the law. But make no mistake, because of the way that the city rules work, it is the developer's own consultant who is coming up with the environmental arguments, which is why I often, you know, we read through every environmental impact statement, every EAS, and we even go so far as to check everything that they're citing to make sure that they're not saying we're going to have no impact. Because if you look at this study from 1976, which I saw once for a parking garage, which, you know, maybe a little things have changed since then. But if they are going to end up with a positive declaration, like NYU will, like St. Vincent's may, I'm not 100% sure. I think they will because they had to do scoping once. I'm not sure about Hudson Square. They have to create what's called a draft scope of work. This is your environmental study. Think of it as the biggest thesis statement that people work on. This tells you exactly what you're going to study. And there was a scoping session, which actually NYU's could be coming up very soon. St. Vincent's could be coming up very soon. And in this session, there's basically a public hearing in which the community has an opportunity to comment on what they're studying. And not only what they're studying and how they're studying it, but what alternatives should be studied. Now, I will say it is infinitely easier to get a city agency to study alternatives. Private developers don't like studying things called community plans. They will, you know, there are things you can get lesser density alternatives. You no mitigation, things like that, but also things like if there's a public action that people don't like I've heard talk about these strips at NYU, Terry, and so, yeah, okay, there. Look, I got a spot. I think the first time in like a month I got a spot. So like, if you don't want these things in particular, if these things really bother you, you should say, you should study it in, as an alternative. Because what it means is it's going to wind up in the environmental review document at the very back, listed as an alternative. It means, what I mean is, in the environmental impact, Cindy, could you advance one more? One more, sorry. Blah, 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 blah. There it is. So they study what the impacts of their project are going to be.
Whose do we want?
Okay. The developer creates a document that says, this is exactly the ways we're going to impact the community, based on all these categories. And you can see land use and zoning, noise, historic resources, all sorts of things fall under it. That study tells us what their impacts are going to be on the neighborhood, and whether you buy it or not. And then at the end of that, they list what they call alternatives. Things in which they study to compare how their project would have more or less of these impacts as compared to what they originally proposed. So, for example, if you want 10 stories less on every building, that's all people wanted, then you would say, study buildings that are 10 stories less, or don't break this height. And they will study it and see if there's any additional impact. All right, and I'll just very quickly say, the difference when I say legal and environmental alternative, there are some things that you might study that have no additional impact on the environment, but legally, they can't change it because you're going to, what they call, increase the degree of non-compliance. So you're going to make something that was already an impact even worse. The common one of this, I want to move the building closer to the street. You almost never can do that. Yeah. So it's a very complex thing, and I could go into much more detail on that.
I just
There's this presentation that you can see all of this when you leave.
Oh, sure. Our Land Use 101, the full thing, is right now online at mbpo.org under Land Use. There's something called the Land Use 101. And I'll give you, we are working actually on getting an online version on the web as part of the Borough President's Speak Up New York initiative. So we will hopefully soon have that up and running. And I am always available for groups to give the actual presentation with my own dialogue, and you can grill me for hours.
Can you create a link to?
You know what, we're going to get to that. Let's all set up.
Let me just give you a couple of examples of what was just said here. First of all, the environmental impact statement, which all large projects have to prepare when there is a rezoning and a variety of other conditions. And sometimes the city does it, but most of the time, when it's a private development that is not sponsored by the city, it's an application by a nonprofit or a developer, it is the applicant who pays for the EIS, and it is the applicant's consultants who prepare the EIS. These can become very expensive documents. It is reviewed by the Environmental Division of City Planning, which is what Brian was just talking about. But then as you go through ULURP, and when you guys are going to have, let's say, NYU, and there's going to be the scoping hearing next week, or next month, or whenever, May or June, what that means is there'll be an opportunity for all of the agencies and for the community board at a public hearing to state, this is what we believe should be included in the scope and in the EIS. So for example, let me give you a real life example from Riverside Center just a year or two ago. When that first hearing was held, the community board prepared its own set of comments in detail, conforming to all of those subjects, because all those subjects, those are the legal requirements of the subjects that have to go into an EIS. So, but then the community board went through each of them and from its own perspective. So what did happen? The community board, in the particular instance of Riverside Center 2 years ago, said, wait a minute, this developer is asking for much more than 3 million square feet than what was approved for the entire site 20 years ago. I won't go into it, it was all part of the earlier Trump Riverside South. So what we said then was, wait a minute, that's not enough. That's not good. What you're not including, and you better, city planning in the city, is include what we call the lower density alternative. And what we said was the lower density alternative should be the one that was approved for that site years ago. We didn't think we had a shot, but we developed it, and then we were pleasantly surprised that when the time came for city planning to establish the parameters of what the EIS had to be, they said, okay, you have to include the lower density alternative that the community board described of years ago. So that's the example. The last thing that's going to confuse, and it always does, and it's very frustrating, when in ULURP, and we went through it, every time, Mel and I and all the other people, as we went through the process, we would go to city planning, we'd go to the developer. For example, we said we wanted a building taken out. They didn't like that. Or we said change the way the open space was and so on. And each time the developer would come back to both of us. It was a rope. The first thing they said was, that won't be in scope. It won't be legal. And because they had been approved in their application as complete. But we kept pressing, and we would each time ask city planning. And the rule of thumb, I'm oversimplifying, but it's a good guide, is it's in scope as it goes, as you ask for the changes, so long as any change you're asking for, you the community, does not increase the environmental impacts and was not studied in the EIS. Or offer such a material change, such as a complete alternative, which is why just caution on how the community defines alternative. So it's very complex, and let's face it, no EIS is a planning document. It's a legal disclosure document to conform with the law and frankly prevent lawsuits. So if you want to plan though, you got to be doing it earlier and figuring it out in your community.
Joe? Thanks.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that Columbia was very difficult identifying the differences and where was there a point of concession on either side. We worked very hard in discovering that the 197A plan that we had developed was the alternative that was in the EIS. And we spent a lot of time doing that. We spoke to a lot of people. We got our electeds on board with that. This was crucial. Look at how they treated us. First of all, they haven't cooperated. What are they trying to hide? We know a 197A plan is a visionary document as opposed to a blueprint. But it could be done, and they did. Another thing I just want to, because it just disturbed me a little earlier, you can probably tell I'm very much on the detail side. I'm a CPA, what are you talking about? The detail side, and you do need some technical credibility. Because being one of the board members who sat at several public meetings and had community leaders say, Columbia's project will never go forward because God is on our side. You've got to get back in there. That's this person's opinion. Maybe they have too much coffee today. Because you've got to get in there and figure out what role you're going to play. I know for Board 9 around this Columbia stuff, Board 9 had to bring the credibility to the table because you couldn't stop those folks once they got out there. And it got worse and worse and worse.
We haven't gotten there yet. Okay, so now here's a question, and I think we should maybe just kind of like go down the panel and include people. Let's just have from your projects, or from projects that you're familiar with and went through, some examples of reasonable and unreasonable asks and expectations. So, Pat, let's just start with you and we'll go right down the line.
We knew going in the expectation that eminent domain would come off the table. Wasn't going to happen. That was sort of Columbia's linchpin. But we were able, and we did it at the state level, and it's reflected in the general project plan, to bifurcate the treatment of residential versus business. So, fine, maybe we cut the business owners loose on this one to save the residents, because, okay, they're in fundamentally a different place. They did have the dollars or the legal support, etc., to fight that battle. So if you delve into the general project plan, one, they've got to relocate these folks. They only have to leave if they agree to, agree to leave and agree to the relocated site, etc., and a period of time that they're afforded to make those decisions and negotiate with Columbia. I think that was something that couldn't be done in the city process because the city didn't know from eminent domain, because it was at the state level. I think that was extremely important. But that's bringing to bear, once again, the importance of your elected officials, having regular dialogue with them, not getting that out of shape when they call you at home on a Friday night and expect you to be there because they're back in town. But that's sort of just that. But I go back to somebody has got to establish that credibility, because they're like, what nut is going to answer the phone today? You've got some group of people who are consistent, who can listen, who are willing to get into the details, and as you said, learn. I learned a lot on this process. Stuff I'm not sure I'll ever use again. but that's just, you've got to have some core team or some experts on A and experts on B, so that a politician isn't caught up in your emotion. They have their own emotion. So you just have to play them so they can pull that emotion out when you need it.
Well, don't tell them that. They're in the room. Okay, Lee. Some reasonable asks and unreasonable asks when you were going through the process.
Things we routinely ask for, we want all of our projects, we ask for 30% of all residential units to be affordable. And this is something we developed in the West Chelsea rezoning and then in the Hudson Yards rezoning, and we have had remarkable success. And our greatest success has been, whereas it was an outlandish request when we started, it is now accepted that that's going to be the request. We don't always get it, but we do. We have a very large percentage of the small off-Broadway theaters in our district, so we frequently ask for rehearsal space, small theater space. We ask for support for the High Line, which is one of our newest parks. And we routinely ask for schools. So that's why I stressed when I was speaking, what's important to your community? Find out and ask for it. And don't be afraid to ask.
And what was unreasonable? What was unreasonable? What have you found was unreasonable?
I can't remember an unreasonable
Because
question.
Stanley.
I can agree also with the reasonable for us, as far as many development projects, there's a 50% preference for residents in our community.
A preference that the residential that is provided, that is incoming, would be available to your, as opposed to new people coming in.
More than the 30% that's generally usually
Thank
offered.
you.
And the unreasonable, like I stated before, that a project will come to our community and we have absolutely no input. It's a $100 million project and the community has no say-so. So and that's major, and so that's unreasonable to us, and that's why we voted against the project.
Now,
I think we make generally reasonable all those stretch requests. We requested that a fairly substantial redesign of the open space, the removal of a building out of 5 buildings, yes, the removal of 1 building, which is probably our most unreasonable request on the Riverside Center project. Also requested 30% affordable housing, we got 20%. We requested a 150,000 square foot school, we ended up with a 100,000 square foot school. And we requested $20 million for Riverside Park, and we got $20 million. So I think early on in the process, there were requests in the early stages to kind of eliminate the bulk of the project, or 30% of the bulk of the project, and turn that into parkland. I think that was probably an unreasonable request, but we became reasonable over time. And Ethel, of course, will elaborate.
So there was one other that I thought was unreasonable in the context today, and Mel and I, we really had to talk a lot about it and refer back to the committee, but the tough one was that there were interests in the community and certain, I would say, civic interests who said that the old idea from Riverside South and Trump that the highway, the elevated highway was going to come down, which was, the Henry Hudson, the Miller car and the Henry Hudson, that never did happen. And there were a number of very strong-minded people through this who said the community board has to ask the developer to contribute to the taking down of the highway. And there were other interests in the community who thought that, what the hell, this developer is going to be making so much money. But ultimately, we and the other people in the community board said that was just too far out from what was going to be, what could happen now. And we had the very strong asks from the community that we had to reflect the school was tops. We were pushing for housing as much as we could, and we were pushing for green space and parks to mitigate the density. So the unreasonable had to do with, we should ask him also for $100 million from the highway.
That was also another jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting kind of to the end of our time, so let's have one more set of questions. I'm sorry, we've got
It's
this.
not a format, but somebody said something that was quite shocking, and I...
Well, you know what, I'm sorry, ma'am, we're going to go on and ask questions now. After the meeting, you can come up and talk to anybody. It's like we're all going to be here.
We all like to
deal
hear
with
what she
it.
has to say.
Okay, so you know what? We're going to go now and ask two things. What would you wish you had done differently through the ULURP process, and what was your sort of biggest success and your biggest failure? Sure, Pat.
I think since you're asking me personally, I'll tell you me personally.
You know what? Why don't we make it personal?
Okay, let's do that. Heavily involved in the ULURP process. I briefly started to get into the community benefits agreement that was being negotiated. For a period, I was the president of that local development corporation. It's very difficult to be associated with the ULURP process or an impending ULURP process, recognizing I knew where the community board vote was going to come, but I also knew Columbia's plan was getting approved. And the goal was, through the CBA, just my gut feeling was going to get approved. And pretty much every elected official I spoke to said, some way, somehow, this is moving ahead. How do we, with that in mind, negotiate the best benefits agreement that we can? And I was very honest with that. And basically, we knew that if for some reason Columbia's plan did not get approved, we could have negotiated whatever we wanted on a CBA, but it was null and void. No project, no CBA. So I think that was personally very difficult because we were kind of schizophrenic some days. So I think my view with regard to benefit agreements, they either need to be smack in the middle of the ULURP process, or they need to be very, very far away.
That's interesting, yeah. Lee, what would you have done differently? Biggest success and biggest failures?
I'm not sure what I can say we've done differently. I would have done differently. I can certainly tell you some of the things we lost.
Feel free.
A lot of it has been to do with bulk, size of buildings. Like I've heard this evening from a couple others, there is a desire to keep the scale closer to what it is currently, and yet there is a desire on the part of the administration to grow much bigger, to get the next 1 million people that we just learned in the census are not, they're coming later. So, for example, in the West Chelsea Special District, we chose Fulton House as one of our NYCHA projects as 220 feet as a maximum building height. And we ended up with two 250-foot buildings, we ended up with a 280-foot building, and we ended up with a 380-foot building. So we lost on that. One of our greatest things was in the western rail yards. City planning came to us and said, well, this is a 10 FAR bonusable to 12. And if you know how FAR works, you take the size of the lot and you can go up 10 times that. And if you squinch the building together, you can go even higher. But in the case of the western rail yards, there's nothing there. It's a hole in the ground. So they're going to create a platform. And then they're going to put roads through there. And the way they calculated FAR is they took the entire size of the plot, including the streets that are going to be built, and did 10 FAR on that, not on the building. So that was the major cost that we
How did
had.
that happen?
City planning wanted it to happen. This is, you have to keep this in mind. And that's why I included the city as one of the important constituents. There is a vision for what the city will be. It is not necessarily the same that we at the community level have. And so there's the tension. You have a developer who stands to make huge quantities of money, more than any of us is ever going to be able really to appreciate. You have political fortunes being made on these kinds of things. With this vision, we have a city planning chairperson who has a vision of modern architecture that is dramatic. It doesn't always fit contextually into some of our older neighborhoods. So there is a tension between what the community believes in and what the city believes in. And we've had some notable successes in changing minds and basically pushing bulk around to keep some lower areas and then some higher areas to trade off with. And we've had some dramatic losses as well.
Thanks, Stanley.
What I would have done differently was probably not join the community board. Just joking. Especially land use, no, they're not joking. But one of the things that I think done differently in our failure, I think, is really educating the board. I think the board itself and the people on the board really need to become more educated. I was only speaking about Board 10. I think that we as a board need to really be more educated on the aspects of the new work and also the process. Because people, I heard Pat mention about emotional. People need to be a bit more concrete in their thinking, you know, than being so emotional. And I can be emotional also, but being on the board for so long, you do become jaded and you've seen so many projects that at that point, you know, I'm able to look at a situation and hopefully really look at it for really what the project is worth. The successes that we've had, I think, in passing our ULIPs. I mean, you know, although we haven't been happy with them, but we have been able to make some input. You know, really, I mean, the ULIPs have passed, and some of the input that we put in earlier has also come to fruition. So that's great.
In terms of our successes, I think from the beginning at Riverside Center in particular, we were very strategic, very clear, and very grounded in the consensus that we derived out of working with the community and the experts around us. So that allowed us, I think, the biggest success outside of the concession was to actually materially change the design of the project so that it was a more accessible, public, community-oriented project and not a closed-off fortress, which is what was originally proposed. And outside of all the school and the housing and the park, that I think was a very very significant success that without that strategy and clarity, we wouldn't have had it. And that also, by the way, happened not as a result of anything post CB7 resolution, that happened in the ongoing conversations with the developer throughout the ULA process. So it didn't, like, we didn't suddenly in the negotiations say, okay, we'll change it. It was very iterative, it was over time, and it was kind of in the context of all the other negotiations that were happening. So that was very important. And then as far as a lesson learned or something I would change, I think we both have alluded to the final stages. We were very good at following through all the way through the Borough President's office, through the City Planning Commission, and then also through Council. We took a PowerPoint presentation and we lobbied every single Manhattan delegation council person and every single city council person on the land use committee. So they all knew our priorities, and we worked with our council member very closely from the very beginning to do that. What we didn't plan very well were those last few days of negotiations where all of the other boroughs are involved in trying to cut a deal within council and really keeping track of that negotiation in a way that allowed us to leave with real crisp clarity. So that would be something I would change. And also, I just got to say, one of the biggest successes, I think, was getting to know Ethel and the partnership.
We became the team of acting as the loyal team. Because we started to do that. I agree with actually everything. And you know, Mel, thank goodness, came into it and became chair at the most important time because Mel was so strategic and so organized that it just meant everything, I think. I just think that I felt that I would have liked to have seen the project reduced some more. Not that density in and of itself is always the only thing, but the connection, we did everything we could to mitigate the density by making the open space better. But I feel that I would have liked to have seen us do more than that. I think we had a little bit of success. It's really a little strange. This particular developer is very active in New York now. He's only come around for the last 8 to 10 years, but he never had done a public approval project. And he came into it, he kept meeting with us, he was pleasant, but he really had contempt, I think. Maybe that's too strong. And I believe we succeeded in not only pushing him and making things change, but educating him that there's people out there, and he just has to deal with us. So, and I agree that we could have done, well, we just in process should have done a little bit better at the end. But who knows if it's going to be built in that way when they all can come back.
Okay, thank you very much. We've gone a little bit over our time. I think definitely it goes without saying we learned a lot tonight. I want to thank all of our participants. Thank you for sharing your experience and insights. I think some of the things that maybe we learned tonight is that this is a daunting process, that we have a lot of serious work ahead of us. That one of the things that I've heard every one of you say is that it's important to be proactive, to think about what you want, think about what you don't want, try to articulate those arguments, that it's important to develop a set of priorities. I think with NYU, we do have the benefit of the Borough President's Task Force and the principles and the recommendations as sort of when Mel and Ethel were talking about values of what's important to this community, to kind of that has outlined those values. So that's a good starting point for us to try to articulate our arguments. Trying to find measurables. You know, it's like, how do you find out? Are we actually delivering? Is this thing that we're asking for or not asking for actually consistent with what we have said are the values that we believe in and moving this project forward? It sounds like it's important to try to develop consensus, and I think this is something we have said from the very, very beginning, that if this community board and community don't stand together with both our work and work together, that we don't have a chance. And so we've got to find out, you know, not just no, but how do we get to yes, and what the yes is we're going to get to, and how do we make sure that we've represented, you know, all the constituencies that it's our obligation to represent moving this forward, and that we make sure that our neighborhoods are somewhat taken care of, if that's even possible. I guess the other thing I learned that we have to stay vigilant through this process, that it starts right now, today, go home, you know, read everything you've ever learned about this process and what we know about these projects that are coming before us, and that we're going to have to stay on top of it until it's over, and that could be years, but if we don't stick with that commitment, then we will lose. And I think I learned a little bit about this idea of a matrix and charts and specific asks, and so that we don't get caught up in our own underwear as we're kind of going along the process where we think we knew what we were asking for and then promptly forgot. So I'm going to work on that, or maybe steal one of theirs. Anyway, thank you all very, very much for coming, and we're going to do this, we're going to do it together, and hopefully do something to help protect our historic neighborhoods. So thanks very much.